The mainstream media has been taken over by identity politics, and it affects the way crime is reported. How a crime is covered depends a lot on what the criminal looks like, and I'm not talking about white privilege. Welcome to America Uncovered, I'm Chris Chappell. Crime is the mainstream media's bread and butter. It's exciting, sensational, sordid, and let's face it, frequent. It's perfect. Nothing keeps those eyeballs glued to a broadcast or those ears tuned to a podcast quite like crime. But not all crime coverage is created equal, and people are beginning to notice. Last week, CBS News New York covered the arrest of the suspected murderer of social justice activist Ryan Carson, and they made an interesting choice.
This is footage of the man police say they were looking for. He has not yet been identified, but we are blurring his face at the moment while charges are pending.
I'm glad they clarified they were the ones blurring him. The only thing scarier than a murderer is an out-of-focus murderer. Now, normally mainstream media outlets do blur out a suspect if that suspect is a minor, but this one isn't. Subsequent CBS News footage later did away with the blur box.
An 18-year-old man has been taken into custody over the past couple of hours. This is exclusive video of his arrest from CBS New York.
Perhaps CBS News blurred the suspect's face because it didn't know at the time whether the suspect was a minor. Or maybe they did because they weren't sure if the suspect was a Gorgon and didn't want their viewers turning to stone. Then again, if they were turned to stone, they couldn't click away. Tough decision. But many on the internet suspect it has more to do with the suspect's race. These people started comparing this coverage to CBS News New York's coverage of the arrest of Danny Penny, whose face wasn't blurred. He was indicted for killing a homeless man in a chokehold after that man verbally threatened passengers in a New York subway. People looked at the races of the suspects and connected the dots. And I'm pretty sure those people's dot connecting was considered racist by some since the dots were all black. Now, some believe that CBS blurred out the black suspect's face because they don't want to push the idea that a certain group of people are dangerous. CBS didn't blur out Daniel Penny's face because they prefer to push the idea that white people are dangerous. Yeah, because nothing screams dangerous quite like a Kenny G album playing in a Panera Bread. Now, certainly black suspect arrests have been shown in the past, so it could have nothing to do with race. Except that the mainstream media has been using different standards for different races for years. Whenever a white man commits a crime, the mainstream media includes the suspect's race and gender in their headlines. They especially like bringing up cases of white men shooting black people. Now, to be clear, there are cases in which white men, whether racially motivated or not, have killed black people. There's no denying that. But the mainstream media seems to almost relish in those kinds of stories. It's the complete opposite, though, when black men commit serious crimes. The mainstream media is a lot less willing to bring up the suspect's race in the headline if he's black. The headline might say something like, "Here's what we know about the shooting," or "Police identify the driver," or "Police search for gunmen." Nice and vague. Wouldn't want people to make assumptions about a whole race based on the actions of individuals, so to prevent that, they make assumptions about a whole race based on the actions of individuals. They're using racism to battle racism. It's not very effective. It's not just the headlines. This article about an attack on an elderly Asian woman in San Francisco makes absolutely no mention of the attacker's race. It's only when you watch video footage that you see the attacker is black. It's this kind of vagueness about race that led many people to believe Kyle Rittenhouse had shot 3 black men, which is not what happened. But it's not just about being vague. In fact, mainstream media outlets will sometimes minimize coverage of black men committing heinous crimes, as some say they did when they chose not to cover the Timberview high school shooter manhunt live. The gunman's race was absent from the headline of the New York Times and Reuters. Makes sense. When you're actively searching for a killer, you don't want to describe what they might look like. Just take a guess and hope they're not blurry. It doesn't end there. The mainstream media even downplay or completely ignore racist sentiments or calls for violence coming from black criminals. For example, none of the most prominent mainstream media covered how the Waukesha killer called for violence against white people. And with the Brooklyn subway shooter, who is also black, the New York Times focused on how he directed much of his hatred toward black people. But both outlets failed to mention that the shooter espoused black nationalist sentiments and said white people and black people should not have any contact with each other. So he hated black people and white people. I can't tell if that's more racist or less racist, which sounds like the worst idea for a game show ever. Hosted by Mel Gibson. If you bring up high-profile crimes committed by black people, chances are people will say the tragedy is being exploited by white supremacists. Because, as I've covered before, and I'm not making this up, some people think objectivity is white supremacy. More on that in a bit. But black criminals aren't the only ones who get special treatment from the mainstream media, though. I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. Black criminals aren't the only ones that get special treatment from the mainstream media. LGBTQ criminals also get special treatment. The mainstream media avoids mentioning their sexual orientation like the plague, even when that is an important part of the story. Like the headlines dealing with black criminals, these headlines about LGBTQ criminals make no mention of their sexual orientation or gender identity, which I think is homophobic. Since acknowledging that the LGBTQ community is just as capable of mass murder as heterosexuals is how we get true equality. In fact, the media may even question the criminal's identity. For example, when the Colorado Springs gay nightclub shooter came out as non-binary, headlines only reported that the defense said the shooter was non-binary. I'm surprised they don't try to do this with black shooters. We know he looks black, but until we get his 23andMe results back, we don't want to jump to any conclusions. The mainstream media's response to the private conservative Christian school shooting in Nashville is very telling. Immediately after the shooting, mainstream media outlets prioritized getting fact checks out in the public, stating that there was no incredible rise or clear epidemic of transgender shooters. Yet they have no problem saying you're in mortal danger whenever you hear Kenny G's dulcet tones in a Panera Bread. They were also careful to warn against anti-trans rhetoric and anti-trans sentiment, and remind readers that the majority of U.S. mass shooters are cis men. They also pointed out how transgender people have historically and falsely been categorized as violent or dangerous, and that there is a ton of legislation targeting transgender people. I'm sure the mainstream media will definitely one day put out fact sheets to make sure people don't hate white people or conservative Christians. Yep, any day now. And of course, there are always those, left and right, who will use any tragedy as a weapon against their political enemies. Like this journalist who says that Republicans want you to forget their complicity in the Nashville shooting. But while the mainstream media goes out of its way to protect LGBTQ people, it's been largely quiet about people mocking Christians, the victims of the Nashville mass shooting. I guess they're giving this kind of mockery a pass since even U.S. President Joe Biden took part in it.
The Nashville school shooting, you believe that Christians were targeted? I have no idea. Josh Hawley believes they were. What do you say to that? Well, I probably don't then. Probably don't. No, I have no idea.
Maybe he thinks he's allowed to joke about Christians since he's old enough to have met Jesus. So why is the mainstream media so focused on shielding criminals of certain identities? I'll answer that after this final commercial break. Welcome back. For a long time, there has been concern about how the media covers crime. Critics have argued that the news over-reports on crimes with black suspects compared to actual black arrest rates and white suspects. They've also warned about how media portrayal of public shooters can perpetuate stereotypes. For example, calling Arab-looking Muslim criminals terrorists, black and Hispanic shooters thugs, or Scandinavians Vikings, even when they're literally looting and plundering. Pressure to do something about this all went to overdrive after George Floyd's death. That was when the mainstream media had a reckoning with race in journalism. This led to an overhaul in how news was covered to break the cycle of crime reporting. Not only has the mainstream media changed language that they thought might be too offensive, but it has gone out of its way to reduce portrayals of minorities in pictures, such as mugshots. I guess you can just use your imagination. Although whenever I imagine a nefarious criminal that shot somebody, they look like this. This is why, according to Poynter, many newspapers are cutting mugshot galleries. The Orlando Sentinel and the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, who are owned by the same company, said, "We've come to realize that without context, the galleries have little journalistic value and may have reinforced negative stereotypes." Similar concerns are applied to LGBTQ people. In response to the Nashville shooting, Poynter told news organizations both news and entertainment media have contributed to the inaccurate characterization of trans people as dangerous and unhinged. Be cautious of contributing to that trope. The framework for all of this caution against stereotypes and tropes comes from a reckoning over objectivity. I told you I wasn't making that up, as much as I really wish I were. As I mentioned in a previous episode, journalists now hate the idea of objectivity because they see it as a standard set by rich, white, straight men. Many see these white, heterosexual men and Christians as oppressors and all others as the oppressed, which is why they have no problem pointing out when a white man commits a crime, but leave it vague otherwise. Given that journalists believe objectivity is just standards set by people, journalists have put it upon themselves to push the narratives that they find the most palatable. That's why they concern themselves with not just presenting facts, but how people interpret them and respond. So before covering anything, they make themselves play America's least favorite game show, more racist or less racist. In practice, this means ignoring how minorities and LGBTQ people are just as capable of committing crimes as white heterosexual males. I mean, that's what equality means. People are capable of committing crimes no matter what kind of people they are. The problem is, when you view the world through this Marxist lens, the only reason an oppressed person commits a crime is because they're really the victims. Like after a recent wave of smash and grab robberies, AOC tweeted how it's much easier to frame people who steal baby formula and medicine as monsters to be jailed than acknowledge our politics and economic priorities create conditions where people steal baby formula to survive, even though it was liquor stores that were being targeted. But a member of the oppressor class is always evil, regardless of what they actually do. All white people are irredeemably racist, regardless of their actions. That's the foundation of critical race theory, which is a Marxist academic theory. The problem with letting journalists push narratives is that they sometimes jump to conclusions that end up hurting innocent people, like they did to Nick Sandmann and Kyle Rittenhouse. With Sandmann, left-leaning media outlets were quick to push a false narrative of a Trump-loving white supremacist mocking Native Americans, which turned out to be completely false, leading to big-time lawsuits that media outlets paid for. With Rittenhouse, media outlets were quick to explain how MAGA's favorite killer gunned down 3 people and became a hero to the far right. Only he was acquitted of all charges when the judge found that he shot in self-defense. I guess self-defense is now white supremacy. So remember, if someone tries to murder you, be an ally and let them. The mainstream media was way too comfortable jumping to conclusions against these 2 white heterosexual men. In reality, the world isn't as black and white as they would like to make it out to be. But who cares about nuance? It's no wonder people are starting to have less trust in the mainstream media. And if you want to learn more about journalists' distaste for objectivity, then click on this video. And check out this video for our deep dive into critical race theory. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.